winds are concerned. Pressure still at 997 millibars, moving 1 mile per hour faster to the northwest at 14 miles per hour. This is now 45 miles northwest of St. Thomas. Last update, it was pretty much directly over the island. As for Puerto Rico, yes, they are seeing rain. They did have some wind gusts up to about 30 to 40 miles per hour, but they're avoiding really the bulk of this, so good news there. Now, Dorian is going to go into this intensification process. It's going to get larger, it's going to get wider, and it's going to get a whole lot stronger, especially heading into the weekend. The Florida coast is still best in line for the worst of it. So a closer look at this, we're now starting to see a well-defined eye wall. This is only going to become more well-defined. It's always going to be the storm motion on the right side that we're going to have the heavier rain, and we are seeing that on the right side of the eye wall. It's going to continue to plug its way off towards the northwest for the next 2 to 3 days. Then it's going to make that sudden shift over to the Florida coast. So something that we definitely want to keep an eye on, and if you know anyone in Florida, well, it's definitely going to ruin some of those Labor Day plans. The longer weekend, and here's what the projected path is. 90 mile per hour suggested sustained winds by the National Hurricane Center by about 2 p.m. tomorrow. It could be even a bit stronger, about 95. That would bring it up to about Category 2 strength. Then watch, it turns over to a major hurricane. Anything that's at 3 or greater, that is a major hurricane and some devastating damage. It looks like in general consensus, everything is agreeing about 200 miles off the Florida coast. Once it gets to right about here, that looks like it's going to be closer to Labor Day itself. It's going to start to weaken as it's moving over land, but there's still a better chance for some more redevelopment as it moves back over to the Gulf. We could have part 2 of Dorian realistically, and then the scenario of it moving up to the Carolina coast is getting a little bit less and less. So we still have that ready, set, go, set for most of the Florida coast, or at least the Atlantic coast. Anyone inland still on that ready stage. So a lot of the Gulf areas from Tampa, Sarasota, up to Tallahassee, I think you're good for most of the weekend. By about Tuesday, it gets a little bit worse as it continues to push its way off towards the west. And I also think it's going to slow down before landfall. So a lot of changes still possible through this coming weekend. Also, water temperatures are favorable, about 86, 85 degrees. Anytime they're 80 degrees, that's rocking. That's where those storms are rapidly intensifying, and we could have rapid intensification, which means 24 hours, it could go from a 2 to a 3, even 4 before landfall, but I think a lot of that is going to weaken before it moves back over the Florida coast. So here's what's happening. We have this Bermuda high. That's controlling everything. That's that sudden shift off towards the west that we're talking about. Once it passes Florida, it is trending a little bit further south. Before it would look like a dead spot on right about Cape Canaveral. Now it's a little bit closer to Fort Lauderdale or so. A lot of these changes will happen, but how that could affect us, we could see it recurve back in, giving us some rain by next weekend, or at least late next week. So it's going to be a couple of scenarios. One, if this Bermuda high pushes a little bit further off towards the east, we will see this slither up the coast, and it will affect areas of coastal Georgia and even South Carolina a little bit more. But most likely, we're going to see this push past Florida, and then we'll see that recurvature as we were mentioning. So a better look at that. General consensus, watch all these lines coming together. That's what we look for. There's always going to be a couple of outliers, but when pretty much 90-95% of them are agreeing, that likely will happen. So we see this up until 5 o'clock on Saturday. This is where things go haywire. Here are 3 scenarios. For us in the Charlotte area, if you're wondering how is this going to impact us, it's going to be a week waiting period. But if it moves right up along the coast, still not great for the Carolina coast for scenario 1. Scenario 2 will weaken this pretty quickly. Scenario 3, this red line, if it moves back out into the Gulf, it could re-intensify, but it's also going to gain a lot more moisture, and depending on how fast it moves, that's where we could have a good rainmaker heading into maybe late Thursday, Friday of next week. As for right now, over the next 7-day rainfall, a tremendous amount around the Florida, really southern parts, to the coastal, to the Gulf Coast. Just really a big mess for your Labor Day weekend. We also have a couple of fronts that are going to twist and slither a little bit closer to home. But as for a few questions, we're seeing Zach saying, how is South Carolina looking? As I was mentioning, there is that chance it could curve up to the coast. Current consensus does keep this to mainly be a little bit further south in Florida, then moves back in. Still could see some rain, but we have to see, Zach, over the next couple of days, how it's going to be trending. A little bit further south, meaning it curves back over, affecting more of the western Carolinas. If it starts curving a little bit further north before it makes landfall, that's where it's affecting the South Carolina coast especially. Coming to Charlotte, Hunter asking that. Well, as I was mentioning just briefly, I think if we get it to curve back out, it's not going to be moving quick enough for anything like a Hugo scenario, mainly just some clouds and some rain. Doesn't look to be a major impact at this point. Again, we're going to continue to keep you updated. Every 3 hours, the National Hurricane Center is going to have an update on this. In the meantime, a meteorologist, Chris Mulcahy. Coming up next is going to be Brad Panovich. Don't forget to also follow us on WCNC.com and catch us online as we continue to keep you updated as Dorian pushes a little bit closer to the U.S.